Hi church, my name is Stacy Orr and I coordinate the women's events here at Heights Church. Over the last several weeks, our devotional series has been focused on Matthew chapter 5, also known as the Sermon on the Mount. We have spent a bit of time unpacking what is known as the Beatitudes. I don't know about you, but sometimes I think that the Sermon on the Mount is only about the Beatitudes. But if you have been challenged by Pastor Craig and have been reading Matthew chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8, you will recognize that there is so much more to this particular sermon. I must admit I was not exactly pleased to learn where I was going to fall in this particular chapter and the verses that I would need to unpack. You see, my devotion is going to be focusing on verses 21 and 22. And the verses that precede these particular verses outline these beautiful pictures of God's blessing upon types of people with various characteristics or people who are experiencing sadness or persecution. And then they are talking about the blessings that this type of group of people will receive. And then we come to these verses which state, Matthew chapter 5, verses 21 and 22. You have heard that our ancestors were told, you must not murder. If you commit murder, you are subject to judgment. But I say this, if you are even angry with someone, you are subject to judgment. If you call someone an idiot, you are in danger of being brought before the court. And if you curse someone, you are in danger of the fires of hell. Well, this is fun. I'm reading from the New Living Translation, and the heading that comes right before these verses is teaching about anger. I'm pretty sure God has a keen sense of humor, as anger is something I wrestle with, but it's not something I would necessarily consider similar as murder. I gotta tell you, I was stumped as to what to talk about today in this devotional. But as I continued to reread this chapter and ask Jesus what he wanted to reveal, he led me back to the beginning of this particular chapter to get a better sense of the bigger picture. So if you will indulge me, I'm going to take you back to the beginning as I think it helps us unpack these particular verses. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, it says this. One day, as the crowds were gathering, Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down. His disciples gathered around him, and he began to teach them. Right away, I noticed two things. One, Jesus separated himself from the crowd, and he kind of took respite from the crowd that was gathering around him. And two, Jesus' main audience was his disciples. Now, we recognize that the crowd was also listening, but Jesus, in this verse, in verse 1, it says that he was talking to the disciples who were gathered around him. And as I think about the larger thread of this month, fan versus followers, this jumped out at me. The fans in this scenario were the people at the bottom of the hill, the crowd. The followers were depicted by Jesus' disciples who were gathered around him. Basically, the fans were below and the followers were beside. See the difference? In order to truly follow Jesus, we need to be right by his side, not just simply following along in the crowd. Then Jesus goes on and begins to speak about the various blessings that come from people who are poor, who are mourning, who are humble, etc. And then in verse 11, there's a slight shift when Jesus switches the word from those to you. In verse 10, the statement is God blesses those. And then in verse 11, it says this, God blesses you, and he's talking about the disciples, when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you. And the verse goes on. But did you see that shift from those to you? It became personal for these particular disciples, those followers who were right beside Jesus. He was talking directly to them and saying that they were blessed because they were more than just a fan. They are his followers. The shift then just leads us to this next section about the law. And it's here that we land again on our verses for today. Verses 22 and 23. Paraphrase says, don't murder and don't be angry or you will be judged. Again, when looking at those verses that precede these, we can see that Jesus is really talking about our heart attitudes. The intent of the original command not to murder encompassed more than physically killing a person. it was about our heart towards God's creation. We are commanded not to murder and also not to act in anger. Remember verse 11? I'm actually going to read it in its full entirety at this point. It says, God blesses you, and this is about the disciples again, when people mock you and persecute you and lie about you and say all sorts of evil things against you because you are my followers. Be happy about it. Be very glad, for great is a reward that awaits you in heaven. Given these circumstances of mocking and persecution, it would be very easy to be angry. I know I get angry when people lie about me, but as a follower, we are called not to be angry or we'll be judged. And I want to differentiate this a little bit, because the anger in this particular section is not just about getting mad when you stub your toe or getting mad when someone cuts you off on the freeway. It's really about acting in that anger and cursing someone. The word here was do not curse someone, and they used the word in Greek called raka. And my husband, who's studying the Greek and some other things, mentioned to me that that word is a very serious swear word. And the people in this day and time would have understood what that meant. It was really writing that person off. So anger is more than just that stub toe moment, but it is talking about our hearts and how we are treating other people. So, as I dug into the word and thought about these verses again, God revealed all these thoughts to me, and my heart began to shift about these particular verses. And they no longer became this worry about not murdering or not being angry. It just is a reminder of what we are called to do as followers. To follow him means to do some hard things. And sometimes that means to not get angry, and to recognize that anger could lead to possible judgment. But as his follower, I can lean into the fact that I'm sitting right beside him, and he's going to show me the way into which to respond better in those situations where I feel wronged. So will you join me as we kind of lean into the continuation of this sermon as God reveals to us as his followers how we should act and respond to the world around us. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a fantastic week and continue to dig into this really rich chapter. Thank you so much.